This episode of the Brutally Speaking podcast is brought to you by On Point Pomade. Keep your beard and hair looking on point with their line of pomades and beard oils over at onpointpomade.com. Use our code BSP15 at checkout and get 15% off your total purchase order. So thanks again to On Point Pomade for sponsoring our show. This episode is also sponsored by the Bean Bastard Coffee. Head over to thebeanbastard.com and pick up any one of their delicious hand-roasted coffees. Coffee lovers will also enjoy their hand-cut and handmade espresso candles and soaps as well. If you're in the Buffalo, New York area, head to their store located at 448 Elmwood Avenue. And thanks again to the Bean Bastard for supporting this show. The Speaking Podcast is proudly sponsored by Rockabilia.com. With over 500,000 officially licensed items in their online store, you're guaranteed to find something you need. Use our code BRUTALLY and get 10% off your total purchase order. Now on to the show.
People say you have to have a lot of passion for what you're doing. This rings true because it's so hard that if you don't, any rational person would give up. It's really hard, and you have to do it over a sustained period of time. So if you don't love it, and if you're not having fun doing it, you're gonna give up.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to this bonus mini episode of the Brutally Speaking Podcast. I'm your host, John. And this mini episode is an episode that I've had sitting on my hard drive for a hot minute. And essentially, this is why. A few years ago, during the beginning of the pandemic, Run the Jewels put out a line of beer, as they have before, and were basically doing a song, No Save Point, for the Cyberpunk 2077 game, which has infamously just been riddled with problems. If you are a gamer, you know all about them. But what Run the Jewels did is they collaborated with 12 breweries across the world, actually. And what they ended up doing was doing a quote-unquote beer world tour during the middle of a pandemic. Now, what's interesting about this and where the idea came into play to kind of start something was going to City Built Brewing here in Grand Rapids, where they were one of the breweries that started this idea for me. They had the No Save Point, as well as they had done a handful of beers inspired by Run the Jewels. As you've heard me say on some other podcasts and on some of the beers I've had here on the show, City Built is basically kind of a hip-hop, Latin kind of inspired beer, Latin and Cuban inspired food, and then the hip-hop kind of comes out in the beer. One of my favorite beers, actually, in the last couple of years was the Rollie on My Wrist. You can hear me talking about it over on the Vox and Hops episode I did. It was super good, but a lot of their beers are hip-hop inspired. And so when I went to City Built and had their No Save Point, they had the t-shirts as well, basically like a tour shirt that everyone had. It was the same dates, same image and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, it was kind of in the beginnings of the pandemic, I should say, where I kind of looked at it and it was like, okay, there's a brewery in New York, there's one in Texas, there's one, you know, here, there's a couple overseas, there's one, you know, in all these places. And I had this idea that, what if I were to try to get all the beers? I know most people in these places, and it shouldn't be that hard. Fast forward to a friend of mine and I having the idea to go in Habsies, because he wanted to try all these beers too. And then it was, well, okay, let's see how many of these beers I can get. And I think out of the 12, I think I have about 7 or 8. So I got over halfway. And what ended up happening was we were, my friend Rush and I were talking about just how cool this is, you know, during a pandemic, you know, when people can't kind of socially be together due to social distancing and people having to quarantine and so forth, that Run the Jewels is doing something that really was interesting in the fact that it was bringing together so many different scenes, you know, the craft beer scene, the hip-hop scene, the you know, the music scene, and you know, just kind of this hodgepodge of people that it brought together during a pandemic. And for him and I, it became this thing where it's like, I feel like there's an interesting story here that when everyone was so disconnected as a result of a global pandemic, this Run the Jewels, no save point thing kind of brings a lot of people together and kind of gives, I don't want to say hope, but I think it gives people something to do. For me, it gave me this idea to maybe make a mini documentary about the beer. Kind of talking to all the breweries, essentially asking them the same couple of questions, which was just how did you get into contact with Run the Jewels? And then secondly, how did you come up with what to do with your base? Because every beer starts off as it's a hazy IPA, and they gave them a base recipe, and then each brewery did their own thing to it. And out of this, it's interesting because there were two breweries out of California that actually did a collab together doing this. And so I thought that was interesting, talking about collaboration and, hip hop and, the duo that makes up Run the Jewels, being a duo themselves, having to collaborate musically and, all these kind of things. There's just a lot of interesting storylines to it to me that I thought would make for an interesting documentary, especially given the fact that it's happening during a pandemic. So I had kind of reached out to all the breweries individually, asking them if they'd be interested in doing something, and I got a lot of feedback pretty quickly. A lot of people wanting to do it and seeing that it was a really interesting idea, and they would definitely be on board. But then we hit kind of a snag, and basically what happened was someone that I was emailing had asked me if I was in contact with Run the Jewels' camp, which I was not, because what I was trying to do at the time was to basically, a lot of people, a lot of projects, especially in the entertainment industry, people talk about what they're going to do. And actually, I'm going to say it's not just limited to the entertainment industry. It's life. People talk about all these things they're going to do and just never follow through, never see these things through. And so what I didn't want to do was go to the Run the Jewels camp and basically pitch them an idea, but I had nothing done. So I figured with Rush, having worked on a documentary before about the kind of origins of tobacco pipe smoking, and me doing the podcast where I'm used to interviewing people and kind of doing that the two of us could kind of do this and have enough background to make something that actually was pretty legit. We had a couple of friends, more so on the video side of things, that were interested in helping us. We had even an idea to shoot everything on our iPhones, so that way we can kind of maybe pitch this to Apple and be like, here's a mini documentary shot entirely on an iPhone, the parts that we're going to do, but then the rest of it is used like through Zoom and Skype and all that kind of stuff. So I emailed this one brewery. They say that they can't do anything unless Run the Jewels is like signs off on it, gives their okay, which I don't really know why. I still really haven't figured that out. Anyone I've talked to pre and post all this is still kind of like, I don't know why. But someone else, one of the other breweries I had reached out to, they had kind of said the same thing, but it was more of, have you been in contact with Run the Jewels camp? And I said no, because what I wanted to do is basically put together what's called a sizzle reel, which is basically, if you're making a movie or a documentary or whatever, you put together like maybe like a trailer, essentially, like a 2-minute snippet of like, here's what we're doing. Therefore, it kind of showcases that you're willing to put in the work, you already have an idea of what you're doing, and you can present it and go like, here's what we're thinking. It'll be bigger than this when it's all done, but this is basically the rough idea. And next thing I know, someone included Run the Jewels camp on an email, and then I got hey, this sound like we were tapped in. We've been hearing other breweries emailing us, telling us about this idea you've been having. It sounds really interesting. What is the scope of what you are trying to accomplish with this? Now, I'm used to hearing this kind of in a different context, which is, what do you like when you pitch to sometimes get guests on the show? It's how big is your show? That's what the scope is. Like, how big is your show? What are your downloads? Who have you had on? So on and so forth. So with this, I kind of knew it was more of like what are you trying to do with this? How big can you get it? What have you done to make it doable? So I put together a really nice long email. And I was able to put together what I thought was a very realistic expectation of what Run the Jewels could expect. And all along, the goal was to get Run the Jewels involved, but it was to get them involved at the end and just kind of basically flip the questions on them. So instead of going, what are you, like, how did you come up with doing a hazy IPA? What were you, how did you pick the brewery? So instead of how did you get involved with Run the Jewels and what was it like when they emailed you and how did you decide to make the beer you did with the base recipe? How did you decide that this was going to be the base and how did you pick the breweries all across the world? And as luck would have it, Vandestreek was one of the first ones to actually get back to me and set up an interview. And we ended up doing it. And I spent about, in total, the chat is about 30 minutes. I would say the actual part of us not bullshitting before, of me asking the questions themselves is probably about 15, 20 minutes maybe, with Ronald, one of the owners of Vandestreek, as well as his one of his brewers. And it was really interesting because it's funny. I didn't really necessarily know what I was going to get into when talking to the people about this. But I was really looking forward to it because from what I had learned from Ed from City Built, with how he got involved, and his story is great. And I do want to have Ed on eventually to not only tell the story of working with Run the Jewels and being one of the bigger breweries here now in Grand Rapids as an independent brewer, not like, going against, the founders and the New Hollands and some of these other bigger companies and brewers. But it is one of those where that story will be told down the road because I think it's a really interesting story and they're getting a lot of attention nationally, and rightfully so. But Vandestreek was one of the first to hit me up, and we had a pretty good chat, and kind of hearing how they got involved I thought was really interesting. They did send me some beers, the No Save Point. At this point, it is the only one outside of the City Built one that I've had. I still have a fridge full of all of the other ones that I've collected, and Rush and I are still planning on maybe getting together and kind of doing our own little thing with it. Unfortunately, the project itself is pretty much dead DOA, really. But it is one of those where, for me, it is a really interesting lesson to, again, very much like how this podcast was built, to not let an idea get in the way, not letting basically your lack of knowledge or lack of like knowing what you're doing, getting in the way of essentially achieving something that you feel passionate about. I mean, the fact that I had this idea because I drank beer with a friend, one of the first times we could get together during a pandemic, had a beer celebrating a local brewery, celebrating a friend, and had this idea that just kept morphing into something bigger and honestly better, I think, other than where it started. And the fact that really, let's call it right now, like as it is. The fact that it even got to Run the Jewels, so that the camp had been hearing that I was doing this or that Rush and I were doing this, and that it got to them and that they were interested. Like, because I mean, honestly, anything Run the Jewels related, as you'll eventually hear when I have that on the podcast, usually is a pretty much quick cease and desist. But the fact that they were interested in seeing and letting me kind of pitch the idea, I think showcases what kind of is fun about having, creative ideas, because you never know how far you can take something or where it'll end up. The fact that I literally sat with a friend drinking beer, came up with an idea, and then all of a sudden now I'm talking to people who are, involved in the Run the Jewels camp is fucking incredible. The bigger goal would have been to put this out, maybe Run the Jewels, when we approach them to come on and be a part of this and be a part of the documentary. Maybe they tell us no, like, hey, we're not going to do this. This is already a product that's out. It's been out. We can't really promote it anymore. There's not really a reason to, but we love what you did. So what we'd like to do is potentially when we do another one, let's go ahead, let's get you guys involved ahead of time, get you involved with all the breweries that we have that are going to do something, and kind of see if we can't roll this out with the rollout of the beer, with the rollout of the announcement of everything. And to me, that's where it got exciting. It was the possibility of what it could be. So unfortunately, sadly, this is basically just the one interview I got to do in this creative idea that I had drinking the Vandestreek beer. I also want to thank Ronald and their crew for sending me these. Probably shouldn't say that, but it is what it is. There's no way you can. There's no way that you could know that I have all these beers, especially the international ones, if some things weren't done maybe on the down low. But very much appreciative of Ronald and the company for reaching back out to me, doing this chat. And I felt like after a while, kind of getting over the fact that it's not going to happen. I feel like this chat needed to come out. I think it kind of showcases a different side of the podcast that maybe I don't showcase as much, that I would love to. And I'm definitely looking forward to getting more stuff like this in longer form, not just specifically about a beer. But this was the byproduct of a random idea I had. So without further ado, I'm not going to do an outro for this. We're just going to get right into it, and then we'll be done. So the plugs, if you would like to keep up with Vandestreek, you can find them at Vandestreek Beer, BIER.NL. That'll take you pretty much anywhere and everywhere you want to go with the brewery. And simply put, if you want to follow them on socials, you can find them on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Vandestreek Beer. That's BIER. Super great and thankful. Now into our chat and enjoy the rest of your week. Guys do a lot of fun one-offs and all this kind of stuff. I was like, shit, like yours sounds really good, with the kind of the lemony aroma and all that kind of stuff. So I was really looking forward to trying to get one and then getting to taste it. And unfortunately, I found one person in the area through a friend of a friend of a friend kind of a deal. And they were like, yeah, I don't have a beer license though to sell beer, or just send it. And I was like, I understand that. Yes, you are absolutely correct. You do not. However, should you just happen to package it and send it to me, I'll pay for everything and it will be fine. But they're like, oh, I don't have a beer license. And I was like, okay, I guess we're just not understanding each other here. And that's okay. If you're not willing to do it and potentially take on some of the risks, I guess, like I totally get it. I'm not going to force someone, but it was really a bummer because yours was definitely one of the ones I was looking forward to getting and trying. So damn international shipping laws.
Maybe we can send some over. But we have to see with I think Jorik, our sales guy, he's into shipping stuff to the US.
Yeah, so it's kind of weird because like in doing the podcast as a whole, what's been interesting and traveling with my wife across the US now is just seeing everyone's local liquor laws and drinking laws. Like when we go to like South Carolina, they literally will have their alcohol separate. So it's one building, but you'll go to the right and it's all their liquor. Then you go to the left and it's all their beer. And you can only buy either one in the one part. So if you wanted to buy like a bottle of liquor and beer, you have to make two separate transactions. And it's very weird. You go like here.
It almost sounds like a Swedish system, right?
Yeah, it's really interesting. And then even like with getting some of the ones like in the two Horace and Mason Ales that collaborated out in California, when they did theirs, California's laws, I could literally buy it and send it to a friend, and they were totally fine with it, even though I wasn't the person that it was getting sent to. So it's interesting to see like even that. And then for like some of the international stuff, like between the, and I might be pronouncing their name wrong, but the Brillo, BRLO, and the one from, God, I don't remember the other one I got, but I was able to buy both and send it to my friend in the UK. And then he sent it to me. But again, it was interesting that like I can literally buy beer for people. And I think I could even do it in Australia too. I think I could buy, but unfortunately Australia was completely locked down. So like if I send it to someone, they couldn't even get to a post office to send it to me. So I
think we actually tried to send a box or a few boxes to Pipeworks Brewing.
Yeah, Chicago. Yep.
But I think that also never arrived because there's such strict laws on sending beer to the US. It's really terrible.
So with the UK stuff, what I ended up finding, and it was interesting too, because I guess they, and I don't know if it correlates to your area at all, but they changed the weight of what can be shipped. So initially the 4-pack that I bought from the one in the UK, we had to separate it into 2 packages because then it was under the allowable weights of what could be shipped without, I guess, being checked. Okay. And the interesting thing is, our laws here, I guess, in the U.S. are so, like, they don't give a fuck. Like, you send something, they're like, cool, whatever, it's fine. But sending out to, I guess, is now where some of the laws are getting a lot more stricter. Like, you guys could probably send me your beer, and it would be totally fine. No one would say anything. As long as you have the customs forms and everything's good to go, they're probably not going to give a shit, because our laws here, I guess, are really laxed. Whereas if I were to try to send it to you, that's where I hear they're going to open it up if it's like an ounce over the allotted weight for a parcel and so forth. And just even learning about that kind of stuff has been wild. And like I said, the friend of mine out in the UK was saying that they had just passed something, and I didn't really quite understand what he was referring to. But he was saying that essentially he was surprised I got the second package because of how really strict they were being about what was being shipped out, especially with it being over the weight. Because he was like, the box it was sent in is great. It's definitely 2 times over the allotted weight that we're allowed to ship a single parcel. And he was just like, fuck it, I'll just send it though, just because it's I know the beer is packed really well, so it's just easier to send it this way and see what happens. And I was like, okay. Yeah, I dropped, like, between the beer, shipping it to him, and then shipping it to myself here in the States, that was about $120 that I dropped on, 4 beers.
John, make us jealous. What was the best beer that you had in this series?
I haven't had any yet. It's all literally sitting in my fridge behind me.
Ah, nice. We're going to open a beer because it's Friday afternoon for us. It's 4 o'clock.
You know what? It's 10 o'clock, but I'll have a beer with you just for shits and giggles.
Cool.
Nice. It's always 4 o'clock somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Ja, nee, je ziet wel dat hij echt een podcaststudiootje heeft.
Zeker. Chic.
It's always fun trying different beers. So a couple weeks ago, I went out and bought a bunch of random tall boys. So this is from Rogue, and it's a pineapple party punch. It's a hazy IPA with pineapple and toasted coconut.
Awesome. In the brew house behind me, today they were brewing a pineapple sour.
Oh, shit.
Yep.
That sounds good. This is the thing that sucks about... Yeah, cheers.
Now my laptop is wet.
That's a really good balance of the... Oh, that's a really good balance. It's got a really nice... The pineapple flavor is like right up front with the IPA kind of flavor, like the kind of bittery IPA flavor. But then that coconut's on the nice back end, so it's like really nice and sweet. It's really good. That's surprisingly really good. I was really... This was... Because Rogue for me is like so hit or miss. It's either like, that's really great, or God, this is terrible.
Really?
So for me, yeah, I'm a kind of...
They are from Portland, right?
What was that?
Are they out of Portland?
Oregon, yep. Out of
Oregon.
Newport. Yep.
Yeah, I think they have a few brew pubs there in the city, and then they must have a bigger location somewhere to brew the beer as well.
Yeah, their distro is pretty impressive, surprisingly. But don't want to take up too much of your time. I basically just have 2 questions for you, and if I guess there's anything random that sounds interesting, I'll just kind of elaborate on it, because I'm essentially collecting all of this, and then I'm going to hand it to an editor and separate the audio and the visual. So when you guys are actually talking, I'm going to probably just do that. So then that way they have just you straight up on the thing for whatever we end up using. So I'm not a part of it, but I'm just going to give him as much as we can and then kind of see where it goes. This is my first foray into doing something like this. So cool. I'm really excited that you guys are my first to do this, and thank you for joining. So straight up
to join you when you're deflowering.
So, 2 questions. First one, what was it like being approached by Run the Jewels to be included in this next line of beers that they released? How did that process kind of go?
Yeah, quite funny, actually. I mean, Jan Willem used to be in the music industry before he joined the brewing industry. And he was quite shortly, he was aboard with us, and he came up with this idea of collabing with a musical partner, so to say. And when he started asking around, an old colleague of his works at Warner, I guess?
Yeah, the sub-label, BMG.
And they do the distribution of and the promotion of Run the Jewels here in the Netherlands. And they were looking for a Dutch brewery to do the collab with, the No Save Point collab. and it fits right in actually with what our plan was as well. We are a brewery that is all about playing. Playground is one of our main beers, which is a non-alcoholic IPA, and that whole playground and playing vibe that we have, we also want to embrace that and want to put that into other beers and all the actions that we take. And playing also for us is playing a movie, playing music, and it all ties in really well with the attitude that we have here towards brewing beer. So it's great that Jan Willem felt that from the beginning, I guess.
Yeah, it was nice. It was the thing is that I found the most interesting is that you're part of something with fellow brewers. There's breweries all over the world joining in the same collab, all creating a different beer, all in it with the same attitude. Just enjoy brewing a special beer with a cool collab partner.
And actually, in the time of us brewing the beer, or between brewing the beer and filling the beer, was also the time that LP moved to Amsterdam. So that was quite nice for us to not be part of that process. But I bet he found the beer somewhere already, and he actually drank it. I assume.
That's really interesting, actually. That's been kind of one of the things about this whole thing that was really interesting to me. And as my buddy and I have been kind of collecting the beers from all over, especially in a pandemic, like right now we're in the process of trying to, storyboard kind of how we want to tell the story of this. And something that I kept saying was like, in a pandemic where touring was gone and we couldn't see shows, and even with lockdowns between, states, countries, whatever, even international travel and not being really a thing, this was kind of something that really brought together three different kinds of communities between the music community, the art communities, and then basically the beer community. And not necessarily there's a lot of overlap necessarily between Run the Jewels and craft beer, because maybe their fans aren't necessarily craft beer drinkers, or craft beer drinkers may not be into Run the Jewels, or the people who are doing the art may not be typically into either of those things either. But when you kind of get something this fun, and with it actually being correlating to the video game that they had the song in, now you're adding another community into this. And it was one of those for me where it just felt like this really cool thing of why I love all these individual communities, and why I kind of feel, it's really interesting to be a part of them, because this is a great example of people coming together and collaborating and making something from nothing, which kind of leads into the next question. Obviously for those that maybe don't know, you were given a base for the IPA. How did you come up with your beer based on the base that they gave you?
So, basically the only guideline that we had was, it has to be an IPA-ish beer with some tangy hop flavors and around 6-ish%. And that's, we make multiple beers a year, which could conform to that description. But what we did basically is here in the brewery, when we came up with the plan, we talked to our brewing team, we talked to our designer, we talked to everybody like, hey, what should we do? And the most fun thing, I think, is that both the brewers and our illustrator, our designer as well, were like, what the fuck, Run the Jewels? They were really into the group itself, into the music. They knew them from way before. Even one of them had seen them live. So it really tied in, really well with the team here as well. And they just, we gave them a free hand in our hop cooling storage. And they went in and they just took the best hops and the nicest combinations they could think of. And actually, till date, this is still my best beer from the specials that we did during that time. And I'm still, we're actually down to the last cases here. And it might be a coincidence, but it's also the best before is actually my birthday on this beer. So it's like everything ties in together so well. It's almost too amazing, I would say.
How has the reception been to the release? I know like Killer Mike's not really big into beer from talking to Ed from City Built here in Grand Rapids. But how has the reaction been to the beer, Ben? Has it brought a wider focus on your brewery as a whole? Like, are more people coming and checking you out maybe that wouldn't have known about you?
Partly. So there was quite some fuzz also in the beer geek community, so to say. So also there's quite some overlap in fans between the beer geeks, the people who have beer as a hobby, so to say, who also really loved and like RTJ. We have been able to get ourselves and the beer, and of course also RTJ, into some quite big musical podcasts here in the Netherlands. Also some national radio and internet radio stations covered the Run the Jewel collab. And also there's actually quite a big one, the biggest music magazine in the Netherlands. Was end 2020, and they always have these end of year lists. And their end of year list, RTJ, was the number 2. Unfortunately, of course, they should have been number 1, but they were number 2 for 2020 because of all of the relevant songs and also the album that they of course released. And the beer was actually mentioned in this major magazine with one of the things that RTJ did in 2020. So for us, that's a big thing, of course, as a brewery, to be involved in more worlds than just the brewing world. So we really love that, and that's a great opportunity that we had in this collab.
What kind of as we're wrapping up a little bit, what has been something that you're looking forward to doing? Like, it keeps talking about how you like to focus on one-offs and so forth. What is something that you're working? I mean, you talked about it in the beginning, but what are you kind of working on that you're excited about?
In general, or with this project?
I mean, I know there's probably another Run the Jewels beer probably being discussed and or worked on, just because I understand this isn't the first time they've done a beer. So at this point, I wouldn't be entirely surprised if there's another round of beers probably being decided and worked on currently, just because of how long it takes to make them and can them and get them all ready for a release at the same time. But I would assume you can't talk about that if that is the case, but just for the brewery itself, if you have something that you're like is on, your to-do list for this year that you're really excited about.
Yeah. So for us, the playing theme and the whole playground theme is a big thing throughout any year. Basically, it's part of our DNA. We really wish for RTJ to include us in more of these beer tours, so to say. We really want the live scene to happen again as well. So I hope that one day we're going to have a little No Safe Point or RTJ beer bar at one of the festivals or one of the venues or whatsoever. That would be really great. It's not something that we're working at the moment, but I like to dream big, so to say. For us here in the brewery, we are actually expanding, even though it has been a lockdown year. We have been putting in new tanks at this moment. We actually have another building down the road now where our warehousing and offices are. So for us, it's still exciting times. We are in the midst of a lot of growth for craft beer here in Europe, and wherever we can make the crossover between beer, music, gaming, any forms of arts, etc. We are very happy to join, and also because we are then the commercial party often to partly fund that and to see how far beer can take us all together.
Yeah, it's living here in Grand Rapids with Founders. Like, I remember Founders being a very small brewery, and to see what it has grown into, like, I know they've been going and making a lot of strides to get into the international market over in Europe and so forth. It's always impressive when you start seeing, like, we have a ton of breweries here, and it's always impressive to see the breweries start growing, kind of like I'm saying with the Founders thing, where they started with a very small building, then they end up buying an old warehouse downtown, and then they just kept adding and adding and adding and adding, and then they bought a whole nother facility a little bit across the street from them to help with the distribution and being able to make the mainstays consistently, because they now have to ship out all over the world now. Excuse me. So it's always interesting to just kind of see the craft beer community and how it's grown over the last 10, 15 years or so, and kind of being, at the epicenter of it here in Michigan. I see billboards now, and I don't know how factual this is, but Bell's apparently, with their Two Hearted, they say that that's the most drank beer, like craft beer or whatever, in the US or something. And I don't know if it's true. I do see a lot of people drinking it when I go out, because usually it's one of the few craft beers that a lot of people will drink. But it's wild to think that potentially that is a real statement, that one of the most drank craft beers in the US is here an hour, like where I grew up, but an hour from me. And one of the other largest breweries that's, making a big scene is Founders, and it's 5 minutes from my house. And we have others that are starting to grow too. We have New Holland Brewery, and
Founders is a brewery that makes CBS and KBS and.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Nice.
Yeah, they have a. Oh, hold on a second. So they discontinued KBS straight up, I believe. I think this past year was the last year they did it. But now what they're doing is flavors. So they have this maple mackinac fudge, and they have an espresso, which I haven't had the espresso yet. But this is probably one of my favorite chocolate beers I've ever had.
That's gonna make you a diabetic.
That's why I'm not drinking it currently. I'm just letting it sit in my fridge, and I'll drink it sporadically. But that's been the thing that I've been finding a lot of fun with some of my friends is doing beer trades lately. So like, my friend lives out in Oregon, so a lot of times like I'm getting all the Deftones beers that are coming out that I can't get here. I'm sending her back Founders beer. I have a friend, Mark from Nothing More, who is a huge craft beer fan. And he sends me a lot of stuff like Weathered Souls. Like that's before the Run the Jewels thing. Like he was sending me a ton of the Weathered Souls stuff. And I was like, Jesus, this brewery's crushing it. But like their distribution's not that great. So like I would never know it if he wasn't showing me. And that's been the really fun thing I think about this as a whole too, is it's for those of us willing to kind of go on the adventure or the beer world tour and are willing to kind of take some risks financially and or maybe legally. It's really cool to kind of get literally local flavor that you're not getting where you live. So, we have our, it's the 12th as of when we're recording this. On the 22nd is when we're doing all the tastings. So that'll be fun. I'm probably going to be drunk by the end of it. But it's definitely one where...
If we wouldn't have a COVID situation, you would probably be able to get our beer because there's actually 2 trips to the US for me that were canceled last year. So normally I could just bring it in my suitcase and then ship it within the US. But yeah, it's a damn shame. I mean, we would normally go to Oregon to check out the hop fields and select the hops ourselves as well. And then there's of course a conference and also for fun. Just we love the US. It's one of our we don't love your politics maybe, but we do love. We do love everything that a lot of the country actually is. So we also like the fact that this is a American thing, so to say. And
I guess
next time that we fly over, I'm going to ask your address and send you some beers of ours.
I would totally love it. I have a whole fridge waiting for it.
And if you're lucky, there's still some no save point left.
Yeah, we're going to be quick then.
I mean, off the record, I'll totally pay for it if you guys want to send it. I'll buy a case and I'll pay for the shipping and all that.
I got to ask our sales guy, Jorik. He's into, he does trades. He gets all the New England beers over here. So he gets all the Trillium and Hill Farmstead and all the beautiful breweries up there. He gets them shipped here. He just pays money, so he doesn't ship beer back. But I'm sure that he knows how to send beer back. So...
It's pretty easy. One of my favorites with shipping beer when a lot of some people with the I don't know if I can. So I have
right after this.
Yeah, I was gonna say these are all my Deftones beers, in the original bottles.
Nice.
And a way that friends of mine and I have figured out how to send them a little bit safer as opposed to just being in a box. The standard 2-day, it costs $17 regardless of how much weight is in it. Poster tubes for glass bottles because it's kind of the same size. You can surround it with the padding and so forth, and then you can kind of do a little layer in between, but you can get 2 or 3 of those beers in a poster tube and secure either end of it too, and then tape the poster tube on either side, so it's pretty secure. Even if it gets tossed around or whatever, I've not had anything get broken doing those. But it's really interesting to see the creative ways that people send you stuff with that kind of thing. It's like I said, it's kind of its own underground thing, and being kind of into underground music, and metal, hardcore, and rap and so forth. It's funny that I feel like a lot of this is sort of the same, where we all have this love of something, but because geographically we can't get these things, we have to rely on each other and build our own little networking of things and learning how to do these things to get what we want. It reminds me basically of tape trading back in the day.
Yeah.
So
I'll get you in touch with Jorik, and I bet he has a way to ship it to you.
At worst case, I'm totally game to send shit to him too. Like,
I'll get you the beer, and we can either do a trade or you just cover shipping costs. But I think doing a trade would be nice as well. I think Jorik is really into crazy beers from the US. So where are you located again?
I'm in Michigan, Grand Rapids.
Michigan.
But I have friends out on the East Coast. I have friends on the West Coast, and I have friends in the South. So I pretty much can, and friends in like mainly in Boston. So like that whole East Coast kind of area I've got covered. So if there really was something in any of those territories or even mine, I'm sure between whatever I can kind of get it acquired or find some stuff. A lot of my friends are, because states are starting to open back up. So like a friend of mine, I have some beers from Montana that I've never heard of that are sounding interesting. So I have friends that are starting to travel out and just go, hey, like I'm going here. Do you want anything? And I'm like, just get me something you think I would like. I don't care. Like that's the fun of all this, is just literally trying stuff. So
have you ever heard of, I'm going to ask you some crazy questions now. Have you ever heard of Jesus.
Narrow gauge.
Narrow gauge.